Minister Champagne, thank you so much for the time.
It's great to be with you. Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year as well. It's been an eventful one so far. Look, the question a lot of Liberals have is, are you going to run in this leadership? What's your answer?
Well, I'm seriously considering that. Otherwise, I don't think we'd be sitting here talking about that today. I would say yesterday was a very emotional day. Today we're like hours since the Prime Minister announced that he will be resigning. So there's still a lot of things to be considered, the rules that will govern the leadership race. But it's also time to listen. You know, there's kind of an era that is closed now, and there's a new beginning. And for me, it's also a time to listen to Canadians, to colleagues, to militants of the Liberal Party of Canada, and form a view. You know, I have my view about what I think is an ambitious and prosperous Canada. And so that's why for me, you know, in politics, we tend to speak a lot. Now it's a time to listen.
Well, what is it you need to hear? I mean, you must know if you want the job or not. So what is it you need to hear in this listening exercise?
You want to hear from colleagues as to what kind of vision they want to see. You know, the vision that I have, as you know, there's no secret that for me, I've said the economy comes front and center, that the Liberal Party of Canada has been always fiscally responsible, that's the roots of the Liberal Party of Canada, that we care for Canadians, but also bring a new vision. You know, for me, I am a firm believer that we should be a confident nation. You know, we have the talent, we have the ecosystem, we have the critical minerals, we have the renewable energy, we have access to market. When I look at the world, you know, I see the world oftentimes, David, in 4Ds, you know, the four macro trends. The first one is decarbonization, and I think Canada is way ahead of the world on that. I see digitization with respect to AI and quantum, and I think Canada, again, is a leading force in the world. I see demography as something very important. Can you attract talent? Can you grow the population? And the last one, which I'm sure we'll be talking about today, is about disruption. We'll be living in a world of disruption. In a world like that, I think what Canada offers in terms of stability, predictability, the rule of law is going to be important. So I'll certainly speak to colleagues, I'll listen to colleagues, and first and foremost for me, I want to see a confident an ambitious nation. That's really what I have in mind.
But what is it you need to hear or see or feel to make your decision? Like, what is it you're waiting on before you decide whether or not you're going to?
Well, it's a big decision.
Right.
You know, this is no small job, as you know. It comes with a lot of responsibilities at a time of where people are looking at steady leadership. I think that what one needs to consider, like I said, is the rules of the game. We need to understand what are going to be the rules.
By the party, you mean?
By the party, in the sense
race, the money, the timeline?
Of saying, and I must say also in the back of my mind, or I would even say in the front of my mind, is my duty to the nation, my duty to the country. The first thing that, you know, what we've seen in the last few weeks might have been turbulence. What is coming is a storm. And how we prepare and how we prevent tariffs from the Trump administration is the one thing that matters the most. If you ask me, priority number one is protecting Canada. Right. The second thing is the Liberal Party of Canada and the leadership race. And thirdly is where am I going to be in all that? But I can tell you, this is a moment in time, I would say quite unique in the history of Canada, where we're going to be facing potentially one of the most challenging economic period if these tariffs are being imposed by the United States. And so we need to do everything to prevent that, to make sure that they understand that this would have a huge impact on the financial markets in the United States, on jobs in the U.S. But that's my job number one. And then all the others will follow.
Okay, I want to get more granular on what Donald Trump had to say today and some of those issues, but I sort of want to finish the conversation about the leadership. I mean, you talk about job number one is Canada, job number two is the Liberal Party of Canada. Does that mean you wouldn't run if you had to give up your cabinet post because of the job that you're required to do on the tariff front as one of the lead ministers in Canada, U.S.? I mean, what are the considerations?
It's one of the considerations. You know, I think, David, Canadians will respect whatever decision I'm going to take with respect to that, because what I'm saying is that I'm putting their interests first. And then, you know, the party and me third in that, you know, because at a time like that, I think that when I hear premiers, when I hear business people or workers, they said, Minister, do everything you can to prevent these tariffs. Be out there, be the fighter that you are, be this co-chair. We've been engaging as Team Canada, presenting why Canada is this indispensable relationship, making sure that we continue to talk about security, the border, the North, the Arctic, the supply chain resiliency, the growth agenda. What I said about Canada, I think we have a unique opportunity, but we still have work to do. So I think you're spot on when you say what's going on in your mind. There's a lot of things going on in my mind, because one of the things that I think Canadians expect from me is to make sure that I would be squarely focused on them and protecting their job, their interests, and protecting our nation. So I'm not the only one. We're doing that as a team. I'm part of a team of ministers who do that, but that's certainly front and center if you ask me, what is your future?
All of these considerations, though, that you're spelling out as you weigh this decision also sounds like a pitch to Liberals and Canadians as to why you should win, should you enter this race. Your economic focus, your focus on, the 4 Ds that you outlined. I mean, at this point, are you more likely to run than not run? I mean, would you say you're considering it?
Well,
on
I'm
a scale of 1 to 10,
considering
are you 7, 8, 9?
As one should. When one has ideas about the future of the nation, one should put them forward. I think Canadians are going to be interested to hear what different people have to say. Like I said, this is kind of a new beginning. So I think it's the time for Canadians to hear different views.
When will you make up your mind? What's your timeline?
Well, I want to see the rules that are going to come out.
Right.
I think that is, we're hours away from the decision that was made by the Prime Minister. And therefore, there's still runway, if you see what I mean, before one has to make a final decision.
But
and I would say also what's going on with the United States are going to have a lot of influence on my decision, because you were quite right to focus on that first. And your first question was, well, Minister, you're also a Minister of the Crown. We're going to a very important period in the history of Canada. So that's why I would say there's different things in my mind, as you would appreciate, but the first one is country first, party, and then whatever I can do to support the party and my own ambitions.
I'm sure this was a tremendously difficult decision for Justin Trudeau to leave and to step down as leader and as Prime Minister when his successor is chosen. But did he leave you with enough runway, you, the Liberal Party of Canada, to do this leadership and refresh in time for an election, which seems like it's going to come a lot earlier than people expected? Do you have enough time?
I would say one thing I've learned now, it's much easier to enter politics than to leave politics. There's never a good time to leave, because there's always things you want to do, there's things you want to finish, there's things you want to accomplish. Listen, we are where we are. Events in politics drive a lot of what's happening. People can have all the plans they want, but like you, when you cover the news cycle, things happen and you have to react. You have to make the best out of it. I think that people will look back at what Prime Minister Trudeau did in terms of social policy, industrial policy, what we have accomplished internationally, signing 3 free trade agreements, putting Canada as the only country in the G7 with free trade agreement. Listen, those are, for any government of any stripe, signing one of them would be an accomplishment. To have done that and to put Canada as this G7 country, which has access now to all the markets, the big markets in the world, is a significant achievement.
But you have enough time to get ready and rebuild for the next election. Pierre Poilievre has a massive lead. He's got a lot of cash.
Well, but one thing we have not heard, and I think he's been living a bit in the nirvana of politics now, because he has not been forced to articulate what he would do. What he would do in terms of industrial policy for this country, what he would do in terms of Canada on the world stage, what he would have done in order to rebuild, like we did the auto sector, what he would have done on natural resources. I think this is a time where people will be asking questions of him much more, because, when you're in the opposition, you kind of have this easy role of criticizing whatever is being done. But when you come into a leadership race, and now we'll have ours, but now I'm sure Canadians will start asking questions, but what would you do? This is not about just criticizing, and slogans won't build plans, slogans won't attract jobs, slogans won't stop tariffs. So I think this is a new era also. And you may have seen he's going to be more on the defensive now because he will have to respond to some of these questions that people say, because they'll see, oh, we have these liberal contenders which have all these ideas. People will turn and say, what about you? What are your ideas to do that?
Well, an idea we heard today came from President-elect Donald Trump, who talked about using economic coercion to essentially force Canada to join the United States, talked about getting rid of the border, said cars made in Canada that are sold in the United States should instead be made in Detroit. They don't need our auto sector. How do you respond to what the President-elect is saying as the minister is the lead on Canada-US?
Well, first, I think he talked about economic force, and I think the real economic force is the partnership. I think I will have to come back to him and say the force of partnership is what should drive our ambition. You know, one thing that I'm pleased to always remind my American friends, and I always say, I hope you're happy to see me today because, by the way, I'm your biggest customer. Reminding them that when he's talking to Canada, a G7 country, a NATO country, we are the largest customer of the United States. We buy more from them than China,
he complains
Japan,
about the trade
the
deficit,
UK, and
calls
France.
it a subsidy. He called the border basically an imaginary line today. He said if you just got rid of it, the economic and security situation for everybody would improve.
You know,
I mean,
one thing
should the President of the United States be saying that about
Well,
Canada?
I would say one thing that we've learned, I was Minister of Foreign Affairs during the first presidency, or for part of his presidency in the first presidency he had. You can't react to everything. You know, you can react and get into that game of tit for tat, you know. On one hand, he would say that, but on the other hand, he said, what are you doing to protect the border? Right. Well, we've done a lot of things. We've been very visible in protecting the border to make sure that, it is safe for Canadians, that we, I was saying, this isn't, when he came with the border issue, that's something we had thought about way ahead. Obviously, we want to protect the border. We want to interdict fentanyl. And we want to do more joint operations. So we've already done that. So that's why I'm saying you can respond, and you've seen it, David, over time.
This is persistent now, though, Minister. It's a total lack of respect for Canada as a country and as a nation.
That's why we're going to stand up. Trust me, David, when I see that, every time I've been talking on U.S. media, I remind them, by the way, Canada is no small country. Canada is a G7 country. We're a NATO partner. We're a NORAD partner. We do protect with the United States, the continental defense of North America. We are a critical supplier for the national defense industry in the United States. We provide energy. 60% of the energy they import is from Canada. And oftentimes I've said, if you were to say no to Canada with respect to, for example, critical minerals, who would you say yes to? China?
Okay, Minister, I've gone over time. Thank you for speaking with me today. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, David.
Thank you, sir. The race to replace Justin Trudeau hasn't officially begun, but several potential candidates are already jockeying for position, one day after Trudeau announced his resignation. There is much speculation surrounding these high-profile candidates, but the only person to officially declare their bid is former Quebec Liberal MP Frank Baylis, and we're going to hear from him coming up next hour. Both Liberal ministers, François-Philippe Champagne and Jonathan Wilkinson, say they're seriously considering a run. Conservatives, meanwhile, say a change in leadership will change nothing.
Canadians didn't get tired of looking at Justin Trudeau's face. It's not like they got sick of his voice. It has nothing to do with the personality of the man. It has everything to do with the policies that have been inflicted upon Canadians, and every single Liberal contender for that leadership race has been a vocal cheerleader of Justin Trudeau and his policies. And we are going to remind Canadians of that terrible legacy, no matter when the election is and no matter who happens to be leading the party.
Okay, we're going to bring in the Tuesday Power Panel to talk about all of this. Émilie Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. Cheryl Oates was the Director of Communications for former Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley. And here with me in the studio is Kate Harrison. She is a Conservative political analyst. So the new year opened with a bang. Kate?
Hard entry.
I don't know if you agree with Andrew Scheer's analysis there that this doesn't change anything. I think a lot of this was baked up in a distaste for the Prime Minister with a lot of people. But where do you think this leaves the political dynamic of the country now that Justin Trudeau has said he's getting ready to go?
Yeah, it's true Justin Trudeau is deeply unpopular, and I think that personal unpopularity has weighed heavily on public opinion. I think, to Mr. Scheer's point, a lot of the candidates we're talking about will carry some of the same baggage, a lot of the same baggage into a general election campaign that Trudeau has. Many of the names we're talking about have been around the cabinet table or have been core advisors to the Prime Minister, including, Mark Carney along the way. So they're going to come with a lot of Trudeau accoutrement. And that is what Canadians, I think, will be considering in the next election. So, I would not be surprised to see a modest bump with a leaderless party. That's actually quite typical.
Yep.
But I do think that Canadians are smart enough to see past kind of a new leader coming in and saying, I've got a brand new bold vision and plan, when the strong likelihood is that the replacement for Justin Trudeau has been somebody that's been very much on his team to this point.
So Michelle, on that, I mean, look, I don't think this necessarily changes the overall dynamic that if an election are held anytime soon, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives likely win. But there is a hope, I suppose, inside the Liberal ranks that this either raises the floor or the ceiling or both, and gives them an opportunity. How do you view it, and who do you think is the best person to sort of step into the leadership role to try to capitalize on this chance?
Well, for a moment, let's just pause and enjoy the irony of Andrew Scheer coming out and saying that changing leaders doesn't change who you are as a party and as substance. So, I guess.
No, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Replay that again. I'm still kind of grinning about that. But listen, leaderships are supposed to be about renewal. And in the Liberal Party, it traditionally has. It's going to be a very truncated process, no matter what it looks like, and quite unprecedented for a leading party in Canada, and certainly for the governing party in Canada. And so, it remains to be seen who actually gets in with such a process, and what kind of a robust debate you can have. You've got a lot of caucus members in there who have been part of the government and voting up and down and bringing in a lot of the issues that, probably Liberals are going to want to have a little bit of challenge to. And then, there's a few outsiders who maybe might bring in a fresh perspective. But at the core, it's all Liberals, and hopefully it is going to be a really robust debate. And hopefully that, not everything is just status quo going forward, and that there's a new platform, new whole set of policies that can be offered to Canadians in the election that seems to be coming very, very soon as well.
Michelle, you worked with Christy Clark, right? If I'm remembering correctly, when she was the BC Liberal Premier. You endorsing her? Who do you think? Who do you have a pick as someone? Assuming you're the only person, unless Kate and Cheryl switch teams, or me and Emily want to switch careers, who's going to be voting in this leadership race? Where do you stand on it?
Well, listen. If Christy decides to run, I would be excited about that. She's a very old friend. We've been, Liberals and young Liberals together since I think I met her when I was 18.
Right.
So we go back a long, long ways. She did a phenomenal job in British Columbia. She brought a party back that everyone thought was moribund, and I think if you look at some of the headlines from those days before our 2013 election, it was even if Adrian Dix ran over a dog, he would still become premier or something like that.
Right.
And lo and behold, you've never heard of Premier Adrian Dix. So she's fresh on face, fresh ideas.
Right.
And so I hope that she does run, but we'll really have to see who the slot of candidates are.
Well, Cheryl, Christy Clark did put out a Merry Christmas video in French on social media, so that was subtle. But anyway, Cheryl, what are your thoughts on this? In terms of where this leaves the Liberals, do they have the opportunity to turn things around, or is Andrew Scheer right that nothing really changes?
Listen, are there any real rules in politics today? We've just watched the U.S. go through an election that seemed like, it wasn't going to be close at all. Brought in a new leader. Things changed dramatically. Not to say it's an absolute parallel to the Canadian situation, but I do think there are a lot of Canadians across Canada who don't like Justin Trudeau, who maybe have been disenchanted with the Liberal Party, but don't necessarily want to vote for Pierre Poilievre or the Conservatives. And bringing in a fresh face, bringing in a bit of a reset to the party could certainly be a viable alternative to voting Conservative. You don't have to vote Justin Trudeau. You don't have to vote Pierre Poilievre. Maybe bringing up, a new face, potentially an outsider, a reset to the party could be that alternative that Canadians are looking for.
Well, Emily, it seems like, I don't know if it will get better, but it will be tough to get worse when you're losing Toronto St. Paul's, losing Les Salamar Verdun, losing Langley City Cloverdale by a massive margin. Yeah. You know, what are your thoughts on where this leaves them 24 hours later?
They cannot do worse at this point, that's for sure, in terms of how our electoral system is working. They're way below the pay mark in terms of actually being able to have writing. My concerns are more not necessarily about whether or not it's possible for them to distance themselves from Justin Trudeau, but more about the tactic, which is quite sad when you think about it, that even if the men has said he's stepping down, the best way to attack any Liberals is still to associate him with the man. And so Justin Trudeau remains the Liberal weakness, even though he's saying he's stepping down as Prime Minister. And so that's why everybody who wants to basically, people would have been happy, the Conservatives and maybe even the Neo-Democrats would have been happy to have Justin Trudeau stay on as leader and have an election being called now. And so they're unhappy about that. And the way they're spinning this around is by saying that basically everybody that's a Liberal is Justin Trudeau. It's obviously more complicated than that. There are tensions within any cabinet. And one of the things that has been reproached to Justin Trudeau is how he's been handling things very closely, with decisions being made at the PMO and ministers not necessarily making the calls for their own files sometimes. And so that's why we don't necessarily know where everybody will stand in terms of policy, but it's not going to be possible for the people who are already in cabinet to be able to run any sort of campaign without stepping down from cabinet as well. So we're lucky. We're very likely to have holes in cabinet again very soon, as Donald Trump is doing whatever it is that he's doing. And the last thing I will say about that is that this is the biggest, this throws off Canadian political axis. We're not used, or political parties are not split around party lines that are about where you stand on Canadian sovereignty and what do you do about attacks on Canadian sovereignty. That's not something that is an issue that political parties have had to position themselves on. And so that's why it's a wild card, is because we don't know what's a conservative position on that, what's a Liberal position on that, what's a Neo-Democrat position on that. And so we don't know how our parties are going to position themselves amongst something that's likely to become the ballot question in spring if Donald Trump continues the way he is continuing now. That is probably one of the main concerns that Canadians are going to have, our national security and our relationship with the U.S.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, a lot about that in the second segment, because let's face it, what the president-elect said today was that was something. I mean, talking about invading a territory of Denmark. But Kate, there is the question that we don't know yet what the rules are. We don't know the timeline. We don't know who's going to run. If a minister's got to step down, I don't know how, for example, say Dominic LeBlanc, who's thought to be running, could be finance minister, border czar, and leadership candidate. But just do the thought exercise of the names that are out there. I don't know if anyone scares the Conservatives, but who do you think poses maybe the biggest challenge to the Conservatives in changing the dynamic and making at least a more narrow, more competitive picture in the short term?
I think it is very difficult to do that just because of how short the runway is. Yeah. So Justin Trudeau has, I would disagree with Cheryl, that there is a big difference in terms of how this has unfolded compared to the Biden and Harris shakeup that happened last summer. Biden left his party in a far better position, polling-wise, than Justin Trudeau is leaving his Liberal Party. Yes, there was a very short runway to have a new leader, and it was impossible for Kamala Harris to create that distinction. I would argue that an incoming Liberal leader will have that same challenge. But Trudeau, because he was incapable of seeing past his own ego, has left his party incredibly weakened. And so regardless of the name that comes in, and I suspect regardless of the rules, it will almost certainly have to be an establishment name. I think an outsider stands an outside to the degree when it's even being discussed. I would say no one we're discussing is an outsider, but an establishment name will benefit from probably any scenario, and that's probably their best bet to make their case to Canadians. But Trudeau has created a circumstance that is, I would argue, impossible for any Liberal contender to seriously create differentiation, become a known entity to Canadians in perhaps as little as a 6-7 week period. Like, what an uphill battle that he has saddled the party with.
Well, yeah, and your leadership campaign then has to roll into your general election campaign. And Cheryl, I don't know if it's impossible, but boy, there's a high degree of difficulty there, right? So how do you do that? How do you go from waiting for the rules to be laid out to getting in, fundraising, running, and then, because the confidence votes are not going to go well for them when Parliament comes back, and then running right into an election campaign? How do you even begin to do that?
Yeah, it's nearly impossible. And I don't disagree. This is an impossible feat for anybody to come in with. And I was only saying, do rules even exist in politics at all? Not to say that someone could come in and necessarily be successful or have even the success that Kamala Harris had in the United States. But I think now it's a question of, like, what are the Liberal Party's goals? Are the goals just to, like, save the furniture and protect Justin Trudeau's in the last 10 years of legacy? Or is it now about the health of the party? And if we're talking about the leadership rules, and we're talking about whether new contestants will be able to sell memberships or not, like, this is the difference between the future of the Liberal Party in Canada and the end of the Liberal Party in Canada. This is their chance to engage people, and maybe they don't get to rebuild to a healthy status, but at least it's something. Engage Canadians again, bring new people in, bring fresh blood in, and really have a robust race. This is the question now that's on the table. Or do we just check a box and say, if you hold a membership, you can vote, and we will, bring in an insider or someone that's been in cabinet and has name recognition within the existing membership?
Well, they've got to figure that out, especially with foreign interference issues, Michelle, right? As we've all been talking about over the past year. But, Cheryl's right. The rules of voting behavior and political gravity have kind of been shattered over the last 5 years in democracies around the world. I mean, your quick thoughts on the opportunity and the challenge here for the Liberals with that timeline?
Well, the party has to act quickly. They, they have a huge task in terms of pulling this all together and actually putting together a real robust leadership race that stands up to the test of protecting against foreign interference, which is something that's going to be incredibly important for the governing party, and at the same time offering a chance, hopefully, for more people to join the party. And to join and to become members and to support whatever candidate they want and have a debate. So, it can be done. It's going to be done in the blink of an eye. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe getting it all over with and having this quick will create some momentum for the party. And, hopefully that there's folks still left at the party that are still continuing on with the nuts and bolts of election planning. So the new leader isn't caught flat-footed as they take over.
Emily, quick last thought from you, if we can. I just wonder, like, Mark Miller was on the show last night saying that we can do a national election in 35 days. We can do a leadership in 30 to 40 days. They're going to need to caucus their party members and their candidates to be on board with this. Does it matter to Canadians if it's a bit more of a rushed, streamlined process? Does it risk legitimacy questions with the broader public?
No, because there are several risks at play, and that is the lesser risk. There is also a risk of not having a leader and Parliament not being back and not having a House of Commons functioning. that is a bigger risk. And so I would agree with that. Just a quick point on foreign interference. The report of that commission, the whole commission, is supposed to be tabled by the end of the month. We still don't have things in place for that. 2 years ago, or not until 2 years ago, we thought that was a really big deal, and now we seem to think that it's not a big deal.
Right.
It's still a big deal. It's still a big deal coming from China, coming from India. It's a big deal for a Liberal Party leadership race, and it's also a big deal in terms of American foreign interference now. Yeah. And I would take the opportunity to beg politicians to stop posting on a platform that is owned by an advisor of Donald Trump right now. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, that's it. Yes. Well, for the record, I still think the foreign interference stuff is very important. It just seems that the parliamentarians and politicians have lost some interest.